Let's get recorded. Let's get going. Hey, welcome everyone to another installment of the Intentional Success webinar series. I'm so happy you're here because you are the brave few people who want to talk about budgeting. So I'm going to do my best to try and make this as fun, as sexy a topic as it can be. But I'm going to preface this by saying, when it comes to building a scalable business, figuring out the balance of your organization, this is probably the single most important step to doing this. This is the glue that holds it all together. So I can't build it up enough because you have to use it to fully understand what it does and why it's important. But once you do this, it's amazing how much easier it is to run your organization, make decisions, plan for the future, and focus on the kind of business that you want to do rather than chasing revenue or fulfilling your revenue addiction, as it may be. So I'm Tom Stimson. I work with owners and management teams who want to make their businesses run better. I work exclusively in the live event sphere. If we've never chatted, please reach out to me. I'd love to meet you. I'd love to have a conversation. If you want to learn more about what I do or just ask a question, it doesn't matter. Always happy to chat. Just hit my website, click on Let's Chat, schedule a call. Happy to help. If you are new to this call, and we are always having new webinar attendees on this, we get new subscribers every week. This is obviously being recorded, and I will double check that we are indeed doing that. And of course we are, and I will post it after this is over, and you'll get an email at the end of the day telling you how to access it. So we use the Q&A box. Go to the bottom of your screen, find the QA chat box, post questions there at any time. I'll try and answer them. If you want to chat with everybody else on the group, post something in chat. I sometimes see it, but I don't always have time to look at it when I'm trying to answer questions. So anything you want to know about any topic, just go ahead and ask. And wow, we just zoomed right ahead on stuff. All right. Man, Don, I love technology. All right. We're going to talk about how to build a scalable business, and I'll see if I can keep from screwing up the AV while we're doing it. So why this webinar? Okay. For those of you who were at the Jumpstart workshop last night, my keynote speech on balance pointed out that as an industry, we are very much addicted to revenue. We want revenue to solve all of our problems. And nothing makes this more apparent than the forecasts that I often see in businesses about how well we're going to do next year, where the revenue is going to come from, and how we're going to justify all the costs that we have built into our overhead and fixed cost of goods sold to justify that through some sort of revenue that's magically going to appear. I do want to say that you can generate a good profit at any revenue level. The first thing you have to do to figure out what that profit is, and then we can build from there. And I'm going to talk about the process for doing that and what the steps are. It doesn't matter what size of business you are. Do not think this is a big company thing that you have to have a CFO or a controller to do budgeting. Anyone can do budgeting. I budget my own business and I'm very, very small. This is not hard to do. And really, the smaller you are, the more benefit you're going to get from it immediately. Larger companies, we've got to get an entire management team on board to understand how to use this budgeting process. So don't discount your business as eligible for budgeting and forecasting, right? Now, if you do this well, you're going to design a business that cares less about swings in income, and it's going to care a lot more about profit. And any owner I've ever sat down with, if we ask the question correctly, they all tell me they'd rather have more profit than more revenue. Now, what are we talking about? We're effectively talking about what's called fiscal budgeting. We're planning our budget for the year. Fiscal budgeting covers your income. It covers the direct cost related income. It talks about the expenses or the overhead expenses or SG&A that runs the business that gets us to an operating profit, right? And by budgeting, we're going to determine what next year's outcomes are going to be, and we're going to do it now. So people often say that it's more, art than science. I disagree. I really think that it is more science than art. This is not magic. This is not voodoo. If you follow some simple steps, if you are honest with yourself and you design your business to work within a scalable budget, this is very much a science. We can reduce the amount of art, magic, and guessing that's involved dramatically. So let's get right down to it. So what are some of the steps to a budget? I'm going to walk you through these. We have to start with some analytics. We need to understand the data that we have available. My dogs agree, by the way, they're talking to us right now. We need to go through some analytics. We need to work on our revenue forecasting. So we've got to put some information in there about what it is that we expect to do and how we expect to do that. Then we build a model. We have a budget, we have a forecast. We can now make a fiscal model, which is basically a forward-looking profit and loss statement instead of a backward-looking profit and loss statement. That will allow us to apply some modeling, some assumptions, some strategies, and see what works for us. And then we review our numbers on a regular basis, which is the management's function. So let's just walk through all of this and let's start with the data. Okay. You have revenue right now. You've got patterns. You've got it might be seasonal. It might be windfall. You have to look back at what you've done in the past, and that's where you start. Now, we've got some interesting challenges right now because 2020 data is useless. 21 data is pretty useless. 2022 data, oh man, excess demand, pretty useless. Our 2023 data, basically our last 12 months data, is actually very valuable. I wish we had 3 consecutive years like this because we would have a much better chance of getting a rock solid forecast for next year. But we have a lot of information that can help us just by looking at the revenue for the past 12 months. Okay? Once we've looked at the revenue, we're going to look at our cost of goods sold. What does it cost us to deliver that revenue? What are the variable expenses that support revenue? Subrental is a variable expense, travel, trucking, logistics, most of your labor, but you may also have some fixed labor that's built into your current budget that is actually direct labor, but you pay for it whether you have work or not. So we have a fixed cost of goods sold and we have a variable cost of goods sold. And we need to compare that to the revenue streams that we have. For instance, look at your seasonal revenue. You have equipment revenue, you have labor revenue, you have expenses revenue. What are those tied to? What are the cost of goods sold variables on that? So we need to understand that. Then you have overhead expenses. Overhead expenses are what you need to be prepared to do work, to sell the work that you want to do, and to maintain everything that supports the people who prepare and sell work, right? So I call this selling, planning, and administration of your company. These are expenses you have whether you sell a single thing or not. Now, if we're good at overhead, if we're good at putting the right people and processes in places, revenue will take care of itself because it is designed to get us the right revenue. But we need to understand what those elements are, what they cost, and what do we actually need to have. And this will all yield us an operating profit. Now, operating profit and net profit aren't necessarily the same thing. And I'll try not to bore you with this explanation. Management can deliver operating profit. Management manages the company. The owners or the stakeholders of the company can deliver net profit because there are some things that we can do to financials and to businesses, particularly in owner S Corp companies, that will affect net profit, which has nothing to do with operations. There's depreciation, there's amortization, there's revenue recognition. None of that has anything to do with operating your business, but it has everything to do with the owner managing their tax liability. So set that aside. Operating profit is what we can affect on our businesses. I need to dial up my dog barking filter. All right. Review. First thing we have to do, go back and review the year, preferably the last 12 months, which is called trailing 12 months. So if I were doing this right now with you, and I'd expect to look at November of 2022 through October of 2023, that gives us our current year. We can see all the seasonality. We can see the individual month's expenses. and we see a very boring report like this, which actually doesn't tell us very much. We need more information. We need reports with percentages in there. We need things broken down. And honestly, we're only looking at a very small portion of the P&L. But this gives us some baseline data. Now, we can take that data and do something useful with it, which is study key performance indicators. Now, I'm going to start with revenue, right? We're going to look at our historical revenue. We're just looking at 2 months here on this screen. This is a company with a huge amount of revenue, but they have some small months. And this is a horrible month. This is a very mediocre month. They obviously have some better months to get to $8.4 million in income. But how does it break down? On an annualized basis, they do 30%, 36% of the revenue is labor sold, and 53% is equipment. The other expenses all break down. However, on a monthly basis and a job by job basis, those are not the numbers. That's a blended total, and the numbers change. And what we'll see here is that very often a very low month, the labor sold might be higher as a percentage of revenue. A slightly busier month, it'll be less. A real busy month, the numbers may be really upside down. It depends on your business. So you need to understand what it is that you are doing on a month by month basis so that you can plug in the right formulas to break down your income. So we look at the average for the year. That's the annualized column. Okay. We break it down in revenue on a month by volume. So a busier month is going to have different metrics than a slower month. And when you're forecasting, you can focus on revenue now and let the historic data and your model distribute the revenue how it's most likely to play out. Now, if you're strategically altering how you sell and that is part of your plan, we can factor some of that into the forecast. For instance, if you're significantly raising labor rates and offsetting it with an increase in equipment discounts, that's going to change your numbers. We can put that forecast in here and plot out the revenue that way. Now, cost of goods sold also has KPIs. So what we do is for a given month of revenue, and I've got the same 2 months here, we look at how that revenue is broken out, what the annualized numbers are, what the normal percentages are. But here we're doing something different. We're not necessarily looking at cost of goods sold as a percentage of income. Cost of goods sold is affected by some income, but not affected by other income. For instance, in a small revenue month, you probably don't have a lot of traveling gigs. That's a slow month. Your big fancy gigs where you're sending people all over the world, that's happening on your busier months. Your travel as a percentage of revenue will go up. However, we know that travel, if I get down here in the middle, travel is a percentage of travel sold. So for each cost of goods sold, we can figure out what the appropriate factor is based on what's the thing that it's tied to. Now, if we look at the top here, we have inside labor. This is a company with a huge amount of inside labor that is a direct cost. They have a fixed monthly expense of $145,000 for that team. They do incur some overtime. There's a limit to how much overtime they can incur. Overtime is based on the size of the month, and it's tied to the baseline of their total inside labor. Outside labor is based on how much of labor sold. So for all the labor sold, 25% is outside labor in these small months. In a larger month, it might be 30 or 40% of outside labor sold. So we get a better understanding of what these numbers mean and what numbers to plug in on a monthly basis. If you want to be less sophisticated, you can always just go to your annualized numbers, and these are all based against the total revenue. If you have a very standardized business with not a lot of variations in the type of work you do, then maybe these numbers track pretty well for you in busy months and slow months, whatever those may be. So every cost of goods sold can be estimated either by the total revenue or more accurately against a related revenue. And in a low revenue month, fixed cost of goods sold is going to pull your gross profit down. So I want you to look at this low month that this company had here. Their total cost of goods sold is 60%. Why? Well, the main reason is they didn't recover all of this inside labor. So while they had a $450,000 revenue month, they had $145,000 of labor they have to pay for anyway. right? That's going to pull that down. We get to a little bit busier month, they're getting better utilization here because now they're at 50% gross profit. In a higher month, they're probably doing even better because they're getting much better utilization on all of that, and they've got more areas to make profit. So understanding how your cost of goods sold track is very important in this budgeting process. Now, overhead expenses are supposed to be boring. Keep them boring. This is a very boring thing here. There's only two variables in overhead. Most of your overhead is fixed costs. Okay. Now there are some timing issues. I know some of you have payroll that, sometimes you end up with 3 payrolls in a month. There's other solutions for that. But the long and the short of it, on this particular chart, we have all the selling expenses. The only real variable here could be marketing expenses unless we've budgeted them on a monthly basis, but it's really going to be commissions, and commissions are tied to revenue. So on a busier month, the commissions that we accrue are going to be higher. Not a big variable, but at least it's there. Getting down here, credit card processing fees. You do more business, you process more credit cards. It's tied to total income. It's going to vary. But in general, your overhead expenses are not going to vary that much. And if they do, we need to take a close look at what's really going on there. Yes, it's possible that your utility bill in the summer is higher than it is in the winter or vice versa, right? That's not a big deal. I can still budget a flat amount and I can accrue that expense over the year, which means I don't have to worry about it on a monthly basis. I can get to the end of the year, see if we're ahead or behind, make a few adjustments. It's all good. But management doesn't need to spend a lot of time wondering why, utility was so high in July. We know why, right? So that gets us through boring overhead. Now I've got enough data. I have the information that I need to actually build out a budget template. All right. And what I've been showing you, these screenshots are from a budget template, which I've shared from webinars in the past. In that budget template, and oh, by the way, if you're on QuickBooks, you can do this in QuickBooks. They have a budgeting module that's built in. It works exactly like I'm describing, where if you find the right data and the right percentages and the right amounts, you can affect every single line on your P&L for the next year's forecast and tie it to a specific revenue, make it a fixed cost, make it a variable, put the formulas in. It works fine. Little tedious for me. I'd rather do it in a spreadsheet because I'm more comfortable there. However you do it, you're going to set up the formulas for cost of goods sold, put in your overhead monthly costs or the variables that affect them. You're going to update based on the prior year's results. So I'm going to look at what we did last year and say, hey, are we doing some things that are going to change these numbers? So I'm going to start with historical and say, hey, we solved this sub-rental problem that we were having where our sub-rentals are too high by changing how we sell and filling in some gaps in our inventory. We finally bought the LED wall or whatever it might be. That can be reflected in your future budget, right? But then the fun part is the revenue, and we're going to get to revenue in just a minute, because when you change the revenue, it's going to change your projected results, and revenue timing will affect this as well. So if you have a properly set up budget template, then adding the revenue forecast is going to show us what will happen next year. We're going to get to a predictive model. We can predict better by putting in better data, primarily forecasts, but now we have a model for taking a look at it. So I'm going to get you to a more accurate forecast, but here's some common mistakes that I see made all the time. Okay. When we put these budgets together and, we didn't have a great year this year, maybe we only made 2% net profit or operating profit, and we're putting the numbers together for next year and we're going to make even less. We've got negative net profit because I don't sure about all this revenue. We had so much revenue we weren't expecting, and that's how we got through the year. When that happens, many people often put extra revenue into their forecast just to make the numbers work so they can sleep at night. So you just guess higher. Well, we only predicted a $400,000 January, which is what we had last year, but man, that really makes my numbers look bad. I feel like we could put 600 in there. I think we can get there without any basis for how that is actually going to manifest, right? So This is natural. This is normal. It's kind of an emotional decision. I want you to think it through a little bit farther, and I'll show you how. You will find out that the lower revenue numbers in your forecast really will lose money faster, and you will want to blame overhead. I'm going to warn you, it's actually going to be your cost of goods sold is probably the problem. Overhead is an issue. You may have too much overhead, okay? But we're going to look at cost of goods sold first because you have fixed costs of goods sold that need to be addressed. You have overhead that needs to be better utilized, okay? And sometimes we need to reduce our overhead or figure out how to magically increase our revenue. But I'm going to start with, what does it cost me to get the job done? And do I have resources that I'm paying for year round that are really only profitable when I apply them to an event, to a job or a project? The other thing that you're going to look at is break even. Break even number is the amount of revenue that you normally need to have to make zero profit. In other words, not lose money. And this is something that I go through in my peer groups, in my coaching clients, where we look at their break even number and see what we can do to reduce the break even number, get that number lower. And if you look at that and you don't believe your break even number revenue calculation, and then you're going to tell yourself that, oh, we can do better than that, we can beat that number, you're going to start introducing errors into your forecast. The numbers don't lie. Okay. We can lie to ourselves, but we need to look at the numbers honestly and figure out how we're going to make this work. So now that our model is set up, yay, let's get to a more accurate revenue forecast. There's a lot of ways to do this. I've done other webinars on this. I've written papers on this. Okay. Baseline revenue forecast is a great place to start. If we got 2-3 years of reliable history, which right now we don't, baseline is probably the average for the past 3 years for that given month or period, right? Having that history will tell me, hey, if you know that we're never busy in August and we're always busy in October, that's good information, right? That's baseline information. We can find the relative differences between the months, build in our seasonality formula. If July is always, 25% of January, great, you can put formulas in there. But when we do this, when we look at our baseline revenue, we have windfalls in there. So we need to identify what the windfalls are so we can remove them from your baseline revenue. Because that $8.4 million company probably had about $2.5 million worth of windfall business. It's really a $6 million company that had a couple of really awesome shows in terms of being really big, which were also in very busy months, which also made them very expensive shows to do. And that's what a windfall job is. It's a piece of business that is not necessarily recurring, or it exceeds your normal capacity, which means it's going to compromise the profitability either on that job or on the jobs that are around it. That's what a windfall is. There are lots of different types of windfalls. Another windfall is a client who's, more than 30% of your business. That's a windfall piece of business. If we're building our company around a client who could walk and take 30% of our revenue away, that's windfall revenue. We should be building our business around the revenue that we can count on, right? So we got to figure out that windfalls do not require additional overhead. You can have an extra $1 million show that drops into April, but you do not have to add any overhead to do it. You just have to plan better and harder to make sure that it comes off successfully. But we don't add overhead for a one-time job. We add overhead to match our baseline revenue. The third thing I want to remind you about in this is that you have to believe your forecast. You're going to ask yourself some hard questions. You're going to give your best answer. Choose cautious. Be cautious as possible in your forecast. My old CFO used to call it sandbagging. He goes, TR, you're sandbagging the forecast. I said, I know I can beat this forecast, but if I forecast what I hope we will do, we might run out and hire people and buy more equipment that we don't need. And that's not what I want to do. I want to use the stuff I have to the maximum utilization. I don't care if I have some extra sub rentals, I have to hire some more outside labor. What I care is, can I plan those jobs well enough that they will be successful without having all the resources in-house? that I won't need once that job is over. So baseline revenue, what's the revenue we can count on? Most of you, if you are a $2 million company, you probably have $1 to $1.2 million of baseline revenue. You have another $800 to $1 million worth of revenue that you don't know where it's going to come from, and that's okay, right? That's information. It doesn't mean that we can't forecast it, but we have to intuit what that revenue will be and when it's going to fall. And one of the ways that we do that is using, well, we're going to use microeconomics and macroeconomics. We're going to use macro data and micro data. Okay. Macro data. Micro data is demand. Okay. Is demand up? That's micro data. Am I getting RFQs? Am I getting inquiries? Am I writing quotes? Am I getting longer lead times? Are the budgets growing? Is there less price sensitivity? Those are demand micro data that I can use to enhance my forecast. That's good data, but demand could be down. I've got shorter lead times. Clients are asking for fewer options. They're doing more price comparison. They're getting more quoters or bidders. That's micro data that says, demand is a little bit soft and I need to affect my forecast. Okay. I may do just as many jobs, but I may do them for less money. Now, macro is looking at the overall economy. Is the economy strong? If the economy is strong, you can trust your forecast more. If you're in the US, our economy is extremely strong right now, particularly in relative to the rest of the world. I would trust my forecast a lot more. Other countries maybe not be the same thing, but you have to look at your own economic situation and determine, can you put more trust into your forecast, or do you need to hedge your forecast a little bit because there's uncertainty in your economy? Now, is the economy weak? You need to reduce your forecast. It's pretty darn simple. You need to get closer to your baseline rather than this is what we think we can do. So for that $2 million company in a weak economy, I might be forecasting $1.2 million of fairly reliable business, but maybe only $400,000 of forecasted extra business. Right? So that's going to affect what our numbers look like. So some models that we look at when we're going from month to month, we look at previous year's revenue, take the windfalls out, we adjust for the demand. Okay, that's the microeconomics. We adjust for the economy. That's the macroeconomics. And now I can reset that month. Okay, move on to the next month, do it again, do it again, do it again. Now, you might have some contracted revenue. You might have some sold business. Here's the thing. Having an $8 million company that has $4 million worth of sold business isn't going to do $12 million next year. They're still going to do $8 or $9 million. However, those contracted jobs are going to overlap. They're going to push out other jobs. So we can't make those contracts take up more than 80% of the forecast for that month. So if you're forecasting a $1.4 million April and you've got $1 million job, it's still a $1.4 million month. Right? There's a good chance you're not going to be able to push that month up unless you get lucky on timing, which would be, say it with me, a windfall. So I can't budget for a bigger month. 80% of that month's revenue is already accounted for. Make sense? So windfall does not affect overhead. So make sure we know what the windfall jobs are so that doesn't mess up our forecast. Now, we also have gut feelings. I get it, right? You know, most of you are solo entrepreneurs or accidental entrepreneurs or small businesses. There's a lot of gut feelings in all of this. My advice and recommendation is that in the market that we're at now, even with this great economy in the US, okay, listen to your negative feelings and ignore your positive feelings. Okay, use the data. Right? If you've got micro data that says we're doing tons of RFPs, our close rate are up, our lead time is good, people are asking for the right stuff. Okay. I don't have to ignore all of that. Okay. I don't have to jump to a bigger conclusion that we're going to do better than that. Right. Scalable companies will always hedge revenue in their forecast because they are nimble enough to embrace windfalls. We're going to have a great year next year. We need to hire people. Trust me, that's exactly what your managers are going to say. If you say, hey, man, we're going to have record-breaking revenue next year, they just want to hire people and buy gear, which you may or may not need. So we got to keep those gut feelings in check. And then we have to do some modeling. So now we've got our forecast, we have our costs, we have our whole spreadsheet built, and we get to play the what if game. This is the fun part. This is the end game. This is why we do this. Okay. What if scenarios are a blast. When I can change a revenue number or add a piece of confirmed business into the forecast, because you're going to work on your forecast budget throughout the year. If I can do that and just watch all the numbers change and immediately see how that affects my outcome at the end of the year, this is a blast. It's a great reinforcement that you're doing the right thing. So I'll point you back to my book right now, because there's a great chapter in there where I help a fictitious client do this, right? So we want to alter the variables inside of your budget to get the best result. What is it you need to do? And you can try some scenarios out. You can say, well, Tom just did this webinar where he said we needed to reduce our inside direct labor and outsource more, but our cost of labor is going to go up per job, but it's going to go down annually. What does that look like? What if I bring in that management? What if I get that person who's our best production manager and I put him on the selling team so that we can sell better? How does it affect my budget? You can run all of those scenarios in there. What if I buy more gear? Here's my favorite. What if I raise prices? What if I raised prices 10% and lost 5% of my business? How much more profitable would I be? Let me tell you, a lot. Run the models. This is the fun part. So in doing this, here are some things that I have consistently found from modeling in our post-pandemic world with my clients who are striving to be more scalable. The models that always work is minimizing inside direct labor, okay? Raising labor rates dramatically. I mean, dramatically. For most of you, your labor rates need to be 50% higher than where they are right now. And if that's causing you to reach for a bucket to throw up in, trust me, it's not easy to get your head around it, but once you see the numbers and know that you can still sell to the client's budget, but you can do it more profitably, it's amazing. Best modeling exercise ever. I talk about this specifically in the book. I share a scenario where the subject kept too much inside direct labor on staff, kind of like that spreadsheet we just looked at. 20% of revenue was inside labor, right? As a result, their slow months made a lot less money than they could have. The monthly break-even point was far too high, and making some adjustments in insourcing and outsourcing and labor pricing had a dramatic effect on their business, and it's worth reading up on. We also want to separate the execution team from the selling and planning teams. So right now, you've got people who are down in expenses that should really be in cost of goods sold, and you got people on cost of goods sold that are also below the line. We've got to figure this out, right? You've got to separate things to do this. So execution is an on-demand resource, and it will cost more per job, but it will cost you less per year. Run that model in your business, see what it does for you. There are ways to do this effectively. You can't flip a switch and do this overnight, but we definitely need to be taking a look at this. And the third thing I've learned from this is that if we keep management in their lanes and we sell and plan year round, companies are going to be more profitable. If I have a selling team that has to be out on show site to make sure what they sold works, that's not going to help my bottom line. I guarantee you that's going to negatively affect your bottom line. Likewise, if I have management who has to be on show site, or if the person who's running my planning team is on show site, I mean, there's so many things that happen when we divide our focus. You need to be selling and planning and administering your company year round. You need a core team of people to do that, to do it effectively, so that the execution team, whether they're on staff or on demand, has everything they need to do their job well. And creating that line of separation, which you can see in the model, will have a huge impact. So again, check out the book. It's great. So keys to budgeting success, right? We got to do things in the right order. We have to figure out what your goals are. Okay. And we'll talk through each step here. What is our goal? What are our profit goals? What are our strategic goals? What's the roadmap for getting to those goals? How are we going to execute that roadmap? And then how do we know that we were successful? So we got to be able to go back and look it over again. So to build next year's budget, okay, decide what your business should earn for you. I've taught this for years. Your operating budget starts with a profit percentage. I want to make 10% profit. Good for you. It should be higher, but if you only made 2% last year, I'll take 10% next year. Set your operating profit and work backwards. Do not compromise on that. Your model will keep track of that for you. You protect that operating profit at all costs, right? Now, how are you going to get to that operating profit? I guarantee you need better pricing. Maybe not everything, but something needs to be priced better. We all need better cost control. That's a lot of process. That's a lot of planning. It's making sure that the right people are staying in their seats to get those jobs done. So that's the execution. That's the separation between execution and planning. And you need to be selective about revenue. If you're addicted to revenue, you don't know how to turn down revenue, you have revenue you need to turn down because it's not profitable enough. It's a distraction. It takes away too many resources. It's an unnecessary windfall. Modeling will help you show when that occurs. And you've got customers and jobs right now on your books for next year that are going to adversely affect your bottom line. You know how to find them? Pull the number out and see what it does to your business. Okay. When we're budgeting, we want to know what the least amount of overhead that is going to earn the profit. Okay. If I'm not earning the profit and I've got more overhead than I need, then I'm probably compromising something in delivery, or I'm pricing myself out of the marketplace. I'm not trying to increase overhead. I'm trying to reduce overhead, but it has to be the right overhead. Now, scalable companies tend to run with half the employees, half the full-time employees. Those employees need to be twice as good. And employees that are twice as good are going to have rock solid processes and systems to make sure that they can do consistent work. It doesn't happen because we said we wanted to do. It happens because we have the right people in place. And then when you're looking at revenue, try to get to the point where you are looking at revenue that you are 100% sure of. It's okay if more comes in, we'll take it, right? If it's the right revenue at the right profit margins, if we have capacity, that's extra money. If you budget a conservative year that you make 10% operating profit in, and then you get a 20% windfall in unexpected revenue, I expect you to be at 20% net profit, because that windfall is going to be extremely valuable because it doesn't add extra overhead. It's magical. Watch it work. This is the best part of my job. The hardest part of my job is teaching management teams how to look at these reports. So very quickly, when you're looking at your P&L from last month, percentage in cost of goods sold is all that matters. Do not let people go, oh my God, our subrentals were $500,000. Something must be terribly wrong. No. Was $500,000 as a percentage of revenue correct? Because the number is going to vary according to how busy you are. So in cost of goods sold, all we care about is the percentage. What is the percentage of revenue for that cost of goods sold? Are we within our normal parameters? We normally run 12%, 8 to 14% sub-rental cost over the course of a year, averaging at 12%. If I have a busy month that's 15% sub-rentals, move on, no big deal. Okay. Gross profit is also a percentage. It is going to be more consistent, but it's going to vary a little bit between slow months and busy months. Expenses are fixed. We never look at the percentage of revenue for expense going, oh man, we had a great month. Our utility bill was only 3.2% of revenue. It's normally 5% of revenue. That is an absolutely useless number. However, if we look at our P&L and our normal $3,000 a month electric bill is $6,000 a month, we need to ask why. Because the actual fixed number is what we track in expenses. And operating profit as a percentage of revenue is what we're working for. If it is not right, let's get it right. All right. I see questions coming in. Keep putting some questions up there, folks. This is very helpful. A couple of conclusions. All right. Believe your forecast. You don't have to like your forecast, just believe it, right? You can always do more work. You can't do less work and be successful. right? It's very hard to downsize your company while you're running through the year. So figure out what you can support, design your company to support that consistently. Don't grow your business from an overhead standpoint until you are very confident that you have the revenue to support it. And your modeling tells you that you need to, and that you'll be more profitable. So modeling lets you take control of the solution. Don't rely on unplanned revenue. I love unplanned revenue. It's great. It's done some wonderful things for me, but if we rely on it, we're going to blow up our business model and we're going to put ourselves at huge, huge risk. Okay. And controlling costs, particularly costs of goods sold, is about having better people and processes in place. Those people and processes can't develop if they're busy futzing around with execution. Separate your show people from your office people, however you want to call it. There are two different career paths here. I was a show guy for years. I became an office person. Lots of people want to do this, some very talented people in both spheres. Pick a lane, stick in it. We need 100% of your skills in the right lane. All right. Keep those questions coming in. Let me talk about a few other things here. Assessment, strategy, road mapping. This is huge. This is the entry point. I've written 3 proposals for this week. It's a simple process to explain. Embrace is actually very, very cost effective. It's probably the best ROI I think I can do for you, which is figure out what your baseline for your business is right now, help you determine your strategy, align it with your goals, and then help you draw out the roadmap to get there. I can work with you individually as an owner operator or your management team to do this. It's a fantastic process. You'll have a roadmap. If you need help with the implementation, obviously I've got other things I can help you with. If you want to do it yourself, here it is. Okay. This is your jumpstart. This is the way to get going faster. Clears out a lot of stuff. You get a lot of knowledge, outside views. I'm really very good at this. This is worth having a conversation about. Any size of business you are, this is where we should start. Now, I'd love to talk to you about intentional success clubs, one-on-one coaching, change management projects, but we just have to talk. So schedule a call with me. I'd love to visit with you, see what I can do to help, hear more about your business. Maybe not today. Maybe we'll do business down the road. Nothing, no harm in having a conversation, is there? So intentional success clubs, I have 2 new clubs starting in January. We are taking applications now. We are signing people up, signed 3 up this week. I'm also building some management clubs. So if you're not an owner and you want to be in a club and you want to learn from your peers and share, I will take management teams and involve them in clubs. So we should talk about that as well. So again, it all starts with a conversation. Let's have that conversation. One more plug for the book. Great, get the book. Podcasts. Thank you for the feedback on the podcast. I'm having a blast doing them. We've had some great interviews, some great insights. I've got some great content coming for December, including the end of the year, trends and forecasts, and it's going to be fun. Matter of fact, that's what next month's webinar is about too. Industry trends, predictions, resolutions. It's a big Q&A session. I have very little to present there. I'm going to give you some high-level views on stuff, but I'm there to answer questions. Start figuring out what questions that you need to ask to be ready for next year. Everything's on the table. Haven't done this for a while. Bring it on. Bring me your best stuff. All right. One last thing, management. Focus on the inputs. Execution is an output. If you get all the inputs right, execution is going to be fine. You guys all know how to do shows. Quit sweating the details. Run your business. Profit is a choice. Okay. You can make a profit. You need to decide what the profit to make. We can model it and we can make that work. And Hope has never grown a company. Hope is great, make you feel good. But if Hope doesn't deliver, what was the use of it? We grow companies intentionally, figure out the intentional solution for you. So I'm going to dive into questions here. I'm going to quit sharing and get a couple of things going here. Again, post questions in the Q&A box. Let me get the chat box back up here because sometimes, that's what people do. There we go. All right. So Randy asked, what is a good labor rate, hourly, half day versus full day rates? Great question. Um, again, I always start with replacement cost. If you need, depends on how scarce the talent that you need is. Okay. For instance, it's been 20 years since I charged a half day for a camera operator because that is a talented position. There are people who do that for a living. A good camera operator is not going to work for a half day. They're only going to work for a full day. Now, what you hire and pay somebody for versus what you charge the client for can be two different things. If I were selling camera operators, for instance, I would only sell a full day rate. Okay. Now, is that an 8-hour day or 10-hour day? Yeah, it's really up to you and what your marketplace is, but it's based on cost. So you should be making 40% margin on a camera operator. On somebody who's customer facing, like your A1 or your V1, you should be making 50% margin on that. So if you had to outsource that position, if they're $600 a day, then you should probably be charging $1,200 a day. So again, I'm not looking at hourly rates. In roles that require an hourly rate, they're actually much higher. If I'm going to send a technician out for a 2-hour service call to set a projector up in a conference room for a client, I'm probably going to charge $180 an hour. It's a $360 service call. Yes, that's more expensive than a V1, but you're only using them for 2 hours. So think about what you pay for service rates when somebody comes and fixes the toilet at your home. They're making $45 an hour. You paid $180 an hour. I don't know why we can't sell that way. What we do is way more complicated. There's a lot fewer people who can do it, a lot of scarcity. So good question. That's a big question, but if we're worried about, smaller chunks of labor, then we probably have a price confidence problem that we need to look into. Next question is about, what is a healthy operating profit? So this is a risky business, right? You invest in equipment, you hire staff, you take on the responsibility of delivering a show. So when you think about risk, what is the risk of what you do? If you sell somebody a $15,000 press conference and the team goes out there and sets up the stage, hangs up backdrops, throws a few lights up there, sets up a PA system, some press feeds or whatever it is that people do for press conferences these days, and the audio craps out in the middle of the press conference, how much are you going to get paid? You're not going to get paid anything. I wouldn't pay you. You had one job to do, which was get audio to the people that needed to hear, and it didn't happen. That's how much risk you have. So we have a lot of risk in what we do, and we don't always have a lot of control over things. So our risk is even higher. So operating profit has got to be good. If I'm in the oil and gas industry, if I can make 2% on selling a commodity, I'm as happy as a clam. If I'm an owner operator running a risky business with capital assets, employees, and a seasonal business, I tell my clients I wouldn't tolerate a budget less than 20% operating profit. We've been tolerating it for years, but back in the 90s, 20, 25% net profit was fairly common. 30% EBITDA was very common. We blew all that away through selling on price, the death spiral, addiction to revenue, not understanding how our businesses work. My goal is to get you past that and figure out how to make this work better, right? So understanding what things are worth is a huge step in getting your numbers right and getting to the right profit. All right. Next question. Yeah. Lori asked about rental management software. Just post whatever event, Flex, IntelliVent, R2, whatever you're on, just post it on there. RentMan. I'd love to hear what folks are using. Thank you for asking that, Lori. I'm agnostic, by the way. There's a lot of things out there that work. I'm more interested in what you're doing. A current user. Awesome. There we go. All right. Next question. Tom, you say the economy is good. I don't feel like the economy is good. Our business isn't doing well. Okay, great. I'm sorry you don't feel your business is doing well. I don't think that has anything to do with the economy. This is what we need to understand. This is that whole thing. It's like climate change. It's like, man, I don't believe in climate change. It was really hot this summer. Or I don't believe it was climate change. It's really cold at my house today. They have nothing to do with anything. The price of your groceries has nothing to do with the overall economy. That's a very micro thing that is not a macro decision. So in a strong economy, which is what we have in the US right now, it's good. It doesn't mean that you're able to capitalize on it. It doesn't mean that either One, you know how to do it, you're set up strategically correctly to do it, or you just may be in that marketplace that is depressed compared to the rest of the region or the nation. And that happens. Understanding what's going on is important. You know, my wife and I took a vacation in central Arkansas a couple weekends ago. Lovely world, lovely community, very depressed. All right. The number of people living in poverty in what is otherwise an affluent area was amazing. But if you go to, you know, if you drive 90 minutes away, here's a flourishing economy in other cities, right? So we can get caught in these little pockets where the local economy is not working out for us. Next question. So we do a lot of product sales. We don't know when those product sales are going to happen. How does that fit into our budget? So good question. Great question, actually, because a lot of companies have multiple lines of business. You might do shows for a living. That's a line of business. You might have rentals. Maybe you have people pick up products at your loading dock. That's a rental business. That's a different line of business than your show business, right? So very, very different things. So when we're doing our budgeting and forecasting, I'm going to forecast their revenue and their cost of goods sold according to a line of business. If you have, you know, a lot of times when you have product sales and live event companies, it is just a windfall. There's no predictability to it. There is no baseline revenue for it. Out of the blue, a client calls and says, hey, we'd love to buy an LED wall and put it in our sanctuary, and you do it. Okay. You can't really forecast that. But if you have something in your pipeline, you can put that into your forecast, but it has a corresponding cost of goods sold. The reason this is such an important question is that if you're used to just putting those numbers in your P&L and not separating them, it throws your KPIs off. And I do see this fairly often where we bought product and resold it to the client. The bookkeeper didn't know where to put it, so they just put it under the expense category, miscellaneous revenue, miscellaneous expense, or they put it into your show expenses category when it actually wasn't a show expense. So we need to separate these things out. You need to have product sales and the cost of product. We need to look at those two numbers together. And when we're looking at our show business, we got to back those numbers out because they're going to skew our metrics. So again, separating all of these things by line of business is very, very important so that we're looking at the data that we need to look at. All right. All right. Questions have fizzled out. If we can get one more in, if you can get it there. I will say this, since there's a little chat here about rental management software. There's a lot, and there's a lot more out there than most people realize. I'm very agnostic about which one they are. It's really about having processes that work. It's a tool. I don't care which hammer you own. Do you know how to hammer a nail? Right? I don't care which saw you know. Do you know how to saw? So rental management systems to me are the same way. There are some that work better for certain types of businesses than others. There are some that are better for supporting sales engines. There are some that are better for operating engines. There are some that are better just because they're incredibly simple and easy to use, right? There's no right or wrong. The number of clients that I have over the years that have been on 4 systems in the past 10 years, it's mind-boggling to me that people would switch around like that, because you need to figure out how to use it and what is it you're asking it to do that it's not designed to do, that is so darn important that you couldn't figure out how to do somewhere else. So I think we spent a lot of time and energy on this instead of just figuring out how to use it appropriately. That's not to say that people don't come along and come up with better systems that are worth looking at. Personally, I love looking at new systems because I always learn from things. All right. All right. Well, that's it for today. I hope you guys got something out of this. I do appreciate you showing up. I'm going to get this recording posted up, and we'll see you next month. Bring some big questions. Thanks for being here.